Alright, now we're going to look at retrograde status and combustion. This is a topic that's often debated, I think a lot of times misunderstood. I think there's a lot of folklore and myth around it, but then again, sometimes people just like to look for problems. So that might be a lot of reason why retrograde is such an issue. It is a very real phenomena, and it does cause some interesting things to occur within the chart. But for example, with retrograde status, you only really need to worry about a planet going retrograde, typically, if it rules a bad house for you. 3rd, 6th, 8th, 11th. When a planet rules that house for you in your birth chart, that can speak to when it goes retrograde. That is a time when you're likely to have more obstacles, need to put more effort. Again, 3rd house is effort, self-effort. 6th house is debts and delays. 8th house are sudden dramatic changes. 11th house, that can sometimes get us caught up in a little too egotistical pursuits. 12th house can give us losses. So with retrograde planets, while yes, they do have an effect, that effect is really dependent on what houses they rule within your chart. So try to remember that when you're getting concerned about Mercury being retrograde. For example, for Virgo or Gemini ascendants, as long as Mercury isn't in too bad a shape in the birth chart, when it goes retrograde, that can be a wonderful time for a Virgo or Mercury ascendant to get a lot of work done. For Jupiter ruled ascendants, Pisces, Sagittarius, Jupiter rules the 1st and the 10th. Again, wonderful period of time to get work done because of Jupiter's ruling those positive houses within the birth chart. For Virgo, for example, when Mars goes retrograde, well, that's terrible because Mars rules the 3rd and the 8th. So for Virgos, you want to watch Mars going retrograde primarily. People who need to watch Mercury going retrograde, well, that would be Aries ascendants. Why? Because Mercury rules the 3rd and the 6th house, if I calculate that correctly. So you can see that when it comes to retrograde planets, you need to consider what house does it rule based on your chart, which is why the shotgun approaches to planets being retrograde doesn't always work. All right, so what is retrograde status? Well, retrograde status is when a planet is starting to move backwards. And it's not actually moving backwards. It's just that as the Earth goes around the Sun and the planets go around the Sun, there come periods of time when the alignment, based on our perspective from the Earth, even though the planet is still moving in its orbit, it looks like it's actually going backwards. So if you look up in the sky and it looks like it's going in the reverse direction than it should, that's when it's retrograde. Now, the Sun and the Moon never go retrograde. The other planets do. Rahu and Ketu, the nodes of the Moon, are always retrograde. So you have to remember that. Now, when a planet goes retrograde, when it comes to external issues, issues of tangible things, like, let's say, Jupiter rules wealth. Well, if we look at a birth chart and we see that there's a retrograde Jupiter there, well, that strengthens the concrete aspect of Jupiter to produce wealth, particularly if Jupiter rules a house that rules wealth. So we have to overlay it with these different approaches, these different ideas. Venus can rule vehicles. If a person has a retrograde Venus in decent dignity and decent shape, even ruling the 4th house, well, then that can show that the person has more likelihood to get tangible, lots of tangible vehicles or have good vehicles. When it's retrograde, the psychological aspect of the planet can get a little difficult. So for Jupiter, whereas Jupiter is optimism, grace, good fortune, lucky breaks, when Jupiter goes retrograde, well, the person can depend too much on lucky breaks. So it's just like as if Jupiter was in a bad situation. The person might think that things should work out much easier than they actually do. That's a negative Jupiter quality. With Saturn, when Saturn is retrograde, well, that's good for the immune system. Unless it's too strong, then you can get autoimmune issues. Saturn is good for having servants, being able to endure, do hard work. But when Saturn goes retrograde, we think about the psychological aspect. Well, now the person might be a little less certain of himself or herself. The person might have more doubts and fears, more so than what Saturn normally gives, because it takes that positive impact and it reverses it. And all this is dependent on dignities, planetary placements. So retrograde status is important, and it actually plays a role in a few calculations that are very important. But you don't want that to be an overriding factor or something that you latch onto. The worst thing that I see with people studying astrology or practicing astrology is they find one thing and they decide that because this planet is in this one particular situation, that is the reason their life is this way, when that's not the way it works. There are multiple factors contributing to something. You can't have such a strong impact within your chart just because of one particular circumstance. There has to be multiple layers of circumstance pointing in that direction for it to occur, which is again why I made that video or that talk on looking at the chart holistically. You have to do that. All right, Mercury and Venus, they're not as affected by retrograde status because they go retrograde a lot. And again, the times you want to pay attention to Mercury and Venus being retrograde is when they're in bad shape in your birth chart or they rule difficult houses within your birth chart. Okay, but overall, remember, it's a fairly minor factor. Combustion, this is an important thing to consider. What is combustion? Well, combustion is when we have a planet too close to the sun as we see it in the birth chart, meaning that the sun is at 24 degrees of Taurus and Venus is at 22 degrees of Taurus. Well, they're both in Taurus, they're very close to each other. The sun is overpowering that particular planet. And anytime the sun is with a planet in the same sign, that is a logitati of Ashta for agitation, which gives difficulties with authority figures, with boundaries, with feeling supported in that area of life that the sun is influencing. So if it's in the 5th house with children, 10th house career, 9th house father education, 7th house relationships, if we get any planet with the sun in a house, that is logitati of Ashta for agitation, and it will cause agitation in regards to the areas of life that that house represents. And how will the agitation arise? It will arise in regards to the planet that's getting agitated. So think about what Mars represents, what Mercury represents, what Jupiter represents. Those are the things that are going to cause agitation. Jupiter, 7th house, agitated by the sun. Well, maybe there are problems with wealth or problems with children that are causing difficulty with the relationship, because that's what Jupiter represents. Moon in the 10th house. This is kind of a silly example, but it's all that pops into my head. Moon in the 10th getting agitated by the sun. Well, maybe the mother or one's weak emotional state is causing problems with the career. Again, 10th house is career. The moon represents mother and emotional states, boundary issues and such. So combustion, it's when a planet is close to the sun, but anytime a planet's combust, it's usually also in a logitati of Ashta of agitation. All right, so what does it mean when we have a planet combust? Well, consider the house that a planet rules, and it's going to weaken that house or that relationship, essentially. So if we have the first lord combust, then that can weaken a person's health. It can cause problems with their body, their physical form. If we have the second lord combust, that can weaken family ties, ties to our immediate family, cause agitation in regards to our immediate family. The third lord, that can give difficulties for the life of our younger siblings or problems with our relationships with our younger siblings. Fourth lord can cause the mother to suffer, or the mother to have difficulty within her life or the relationship to the mother. Fifth lord, combust with the sun, can give difficulty dealing with children, having children. Sixth lord can give troubles with subordinates or employees. It can also give difficulty with our immunity and our resistance to disease. The 7th Lord combust. That's never good for relationships. That can cause there to be some ego battles within relationships, and it makes it very difficult for a person sometimes to get married or have relationships, healthy ones. 8th Lord combust causes problems with our longevity, our vitality. 9th Lord is difficult for the father or guru or our education. 10th Lord gives difficulty with authorities or our career. So 10th Lord combust will have problems with our career or with authorities. 11th Lord combust gives difficulty with elder siblings. It can also give difficulty with achieving like diplomas or degrees or being recognized. The 11th Lord also can be representational of, say, immigration status, getting that proof that you are a citizen. So the 11th Lord combust can cause problems there. 12th Lord typically brings a sense of isolation or feelings of loss into the person's life. It can give difficulty managing our expenses as well. So 12th Lord combust might have problems managing our expenses. So essentially, when a planet's too close to the sun, think about what house it rules. Whatever house it rules, that's where the difficulty will come up. And again, this is not something that you want to put all of your money on when you are making a chart assessment, but you use it to just further color what you see in other areas of the chart. All right, now the idea that comes up is, well, what are the orbs of combustion? I usually use pretty tight orbs of combustion. When the moon is within 12 to 15 degrees of the sun, it's combust. Again, I get a little bit, I go on the smaller end of that, so 12 degrees. Mercury, when it's between 2 to 14 degrees, combust. Venus, 4 to 10 degrees, combust. When Mars is within 8 to 17 degrees, it's combust. Jupiter, between 8 to 11. And Saturn, between 8 to 15. So that's the window. And what I mean by degrees, it doesn't mean that the moon is at 12 degrees of Scorpio and the sun is at 28 degrees of Scorpio. And since the moon is at 12, it's combust. It's from the planet. So if the sun was at 13 degrees of Scorpio and the moon was at 1 degree, that's a 12 degree difference, that would be considered combust. If Mars was at 28 degrees of Cancer and the sun was at 20 degrees of Cancer, well, that's an 8 degree difference, so that would also be combust. So consider this, retrograde status, combustion. Again, it's not something that you want to give all of your research time to. There are very important factors, but you need to look at the chart as a whole. If your mind is drawn towards it and you feel as you're giving a reading that this is a very important thing just because you see combustion, go ahead and say it, no big deal. But if you're doing some research and you see it's combust, look at other areas. So what do I mean by that? Let's say the 8th Lord is combust, which can weaken longevity. All right, so the 8th Lord is combust. Now let's consider other factors. What is the dignity of the 8th Lord? Does the 8th Lord have any positive Logitatia Vashtas helping it? What is the influences of other planets to the sun? The sun is a prime planet that represents longevity, or not longevity, pardon me, vitality, which is an 8th house affair. So if the sun has a lot of help, well, that can help to mitigate this combustion to the 8th Lord. So there are a number of levels of things that you have to look at within the chart, but if you see 5 different things pointing one direction, it's safe to say that is an issue. If you see only one thing and it's only indicated because it's combustion, I wouldn't spend too much time on it. Maybe the 5th Lord's combust, which can give difficulty with children. Maybe Jupiter is exalted, which really helps with children. Maybe the 5th house has a lot of positive aspects from planets in good dignity. or it has a lot of planets in good dignity in the 5th house, well, that can help that area of life too. So it's not just one thing. You have to consider multiple levels and factors. All right, thank you very much. And next up, House Lords, I believe. Hopefully I'm right there.